Hello to all my fellow creative Christians out there. This is Tim Risto, host of the Creative Christians podcast, with another episode of AfterThoughts. Over this past weekend, I debuted the latest episode of the Creative Christians podcast, a topic-based episode, the first of our topic-based episodes, titled Inspiration, where I go solo, no guest, and tackled this topic of inspiration and talked about it for over an hour. So, based on downloads and comments and personal messages, it seems to be being well received so far. So, I want to say thank you to all of you for downloading and listening and giving it a strong start. I really appreciate my audience out there and everyone for taking the time to do that. And if you haven't listened yet, hey, get busy, download, listen to it, let me know what you think. So today here on AfterThoughts, I wanted to talk a little bit more about putting that episode together, about podcasting, about content, and about the delivery of content and how that's changing a little bit too here. At the end, we'll talk about that. But first, let me talk about this episode of inspiration. Back in the first episode of AfterThoughts, I talked about the creative process and how I was kind of learning through this episode about the researching, writing, recording, and repeating process, and how that was developing my content. I was learning a lot through that process. Again, not something I'd recommend for everybody to do, but it was helpful for me at this particular time for this episode. But I want to take a moment and talk more about podcasting and delivering content and developing content and the creative process involved with podcasting. I found that I love podcasting. It's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this. And developing content is, I think, part of what I really enjoy. You know, they say don't get into podcasts if you're expecting to, one, get rich, and two, be famous, because it's probably not going to happen. It's a small percentage of podcasters out there, and this is an exploding industry. The world of podcasting has got a ton of people involved, a ton of programming, and even in the last year and a half, 2 years since I've gotten involved, it's exploded even more. So don't expect to be famous or to be rich right off the bat. Doesn't mean you can't, but it's going to take time to build programming, build an audience, and develop it. And even then, it doesn't mean that you'll be rich and famous. Do podcasting because it's something you enjoy, something you love to do. And that's where I find myself right now. I'm just truly enjoying this. It's just kind of exciting to have content that I can produce on my own. This isn't for a client. This is for me and my audience. It's nice to have an audience, and also to have a message or messages that I want to communicate through this program, through this show. So that's really a lot of fun. And also I feel it's something that God's called me to do. So it's a calling I've had placed on my life, and the challenge is, meeting that calling and living up to it. First of all, I'd like to ask anybody out there, any of my listeners and viewers, are you podcasters? And if so, share with me in the comments what your podcast is and why you do that, why you are in podcasting, why you're doing that specific podcast. I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment, comment below, let me know. Why is it fun for you? Why is it exciting for you? Why, as a Christian creative, do you do the show, the program, or programs, if you got more than one, that you do? I'd love to hear about that. Second, let me just share about putting the episode of inspiration together from a little bit different than what I talked about in the first episode of Afterthoughts. So selecting the topic of inspiration for this first topic-based episode was not tough. I knew that's where I wanted to start, with a topic that was based on the beginning of the creative process. And so that seemed a natural. But what was challenging as I dug into it was honing the content, refining it, developing it into an area that didn't go off the rails or too far off, and that I could keep a line of thinking through it all. And I think I was able to achieve that. If you've heard the episode of Creative Christians, let me know what you think. I'd love to see if it hits home for you in any way, if there's some things that are inspiring to you, and if it gives you some content worth thinking about, evaluating, and applying to your own creative life. I wanted to have 5 takeaways in the episode. 5 things that my listeners could come away with and actually apply to your own life. So, defining what those were was challenging because I wanted both a spiritual dimension to some of them, but I also wanted a few practical ones. I mean, I could have just made a list of practical things that you can do to try and get inspired. But there's so much of that out there on the web. You can do a search and find that very, very easily. And a lot of them are the same. But really, I felt like what hadn't been addressed was things that had more of the spiritual dimension and things that help to draw us as Christian creatives back to the source of our creativity, which is God. So emphasizing that while also throwing in, some practical elements and keeping it specific as much as possible to Christian creatives was really my goal. Let me go over those 5 takeaways right now. Spoiler alert, this will be the podcast in a nutshell. But first one is make time for creativity because it offers you the opportunity for inspiration to occur. Second one is seek out biblical wisdom. Read your Bible because you will be inspired by things you read in your Bible very clearly. And not just as a daily devotion. I'm assuming you're doing that already. But read the Bible looking for things related to inspiration or to creativity. Read about people in the Bible that are creative or the ways the Bible is creative. But just look for creativity and inspiration when you sit down to study the Bible in those times. Third is find a mentor. I know that sounds like, I can't just go out and do that. But evaluate people in your life. If you don't have a mentor already, go look for people in your life that you could ask to be a mentor for you. Fourth, study other creative works. See what inspires you by seeing what other people have done. Both Christian creatives and non-Christians. See how those works inspire you in your own work and evaluate works just for inspiration, not just for consuming as entertainment, but for inspiration. And then last but not least is, what is last but not least? And last but not least, study God's creation. Look at what God created, His creation. His creativity is all around us. Observe that, engage with that, including other people and their lives and their stories, and then you'll be inspired by all that. Okay, so that in a nutshell is the 5 points, or are the 5 points that I presented in the podcast in very short form. Go into all sorts of wonderful detail and get to explore those at length in the episode. But those are the 5 takeaways. Are those helpful for you? When you've heard the whole episode and heard the depth at which we explore those and the different avenues I take, is that helpful? Do you find those things that you would apply to your life and could be helpful to you and your creativity and in generating the possibility of inspiration happening in your life? Are you doing some of these already? And if you are, do you find inspiration comes from them? And if not, if you find these points too simplistic or too, not useful for you, then what are some suggestions you have? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what inspires you in your creative life. Feel free to share those in the comments too. I'd love to hear from you. So digging in and developing content like that, coming up with those 5 takeaways, it takes time, it takes research, it takes effort, it takes thought, a lot of thinking and prayer to make sure that I'm delivering content that's of value to you, and also things that I feel are near and dear to my heart too. So I love that about podcasting. It's the opportunity to dig into content and to develop some ideas and thoughts and learn some things myself too along the way. I learned a lot about this by digging in further. And, also, as I mentioned, going through the creative process that I did helped me to develop the content. It's amazing how once you enter into this world of podcasting or any content-driven, media field for that matter, you really come away with a better appreciation for the particular message and content that you're studying. And you don't necessarily become an expert at it, but suddenly you have things to say about it. Suddenly you discover more that, you develop opinions about things. You see ideas about things. Even selecting the Bible verses that I did helped me to get into and realize there's a ton of great content in the Bible about inspiration or creativity, even if they aren't directly referenced by the words inspiration, creativity. There are things that are so creative about the Bible. And as I started digging into Scripture, I realized, wow, there's a lot more here than I realized. I don't know it all. I'm still learning and discovering a lot of that myself, and I'm encouraging you to do the same in your creative life. But it does get me thinking about, now I want to do a podcast episode about, or maybe an Afterthoughts episode, I haven't decided yet, but about my favorite creative books of the Bible. Listing some of my favorite books that appealed to me as a Christian creative. Not to try and highlight them over other books of the Bible or to throw the rest of the Bible out, but just to kind of note books that are perhaps more creative, in their appeal to me as a Christian creative than other books, and just to kind of note that. Obviously, you want to read the whole Bible. The whole Bible is creative as a whole, but I think there are books that have certain creative elements that kind of stand out and may speak to us more as Christian creatives. So I want to talk about that in an upcoming episode of the podcast. I think that'd be fun. In my podcast, I also discussed faith-based films, taking a brief look at Sound of Freedom. And I thought there is another great topic for a future full podcast episode, topic-based episode, talking about faith-based films and the filmmakers behind them and their messaging and their faith, and how they each work to communicate it in different ways through the films they make. So the more you dig in, the more you just start digging into a certain message or into your content, it starts to generate more and more. And you realize you've got a lot more to say than you did before. That's what's exciting to me. I love stuff like that, where you discover things about yourself, about the world, about messaging, that you can share with your audience. That's what's exciting for me, to see so many podcasters out there finding things that they have to say. You as Christian creatives, I'd highly encourage you, if you're at all interested in getting into podcast and being a content creator of some sort, if you aren't now already, do it. You'll probably regret it if you don't pursue it. It's just a wonderful journey to undertake. And if you get into it and discover it doesn't work, fine. But if you don't try it, I think you'll regret it. And the tools are there, the opportunities are there, the platforms are there. It's not that tough to get into once you've maybe made some initial investments of some equipment. And with podcasting, it's minimal, especially if you're doing audio podcasting. But even video, I'm using my cell phone right now to record these afterthoughts just because it's quick and easy. Later on, I may go back to doing something on my 4K camera, but at the moment, this is just so much easier to do, and it's quick with these weekly Afterthoughts episodes to knock it out. So you've probably got more tools in place than you think, and it's great to just jump in and start dealing with content and let some of the technical aspects kind of evolve as you go along. But if you're interested, do it. It's such a wonderful field to engage with. And it's neat to hear other people's thoughts and to see other creatives out there at work doing what they are passionate about doing, delivering messages that they're passionate about delivering. This probably is one of the greatest times to be a creative. I really think so. There's just so many opportunities for individuals to be creative and to share their creative skills and gifts. And as Christians, we're called to do that, and to do that in a God-pleasing way. We have an opportunity to leave an impact on the world of God working through us and our gifts and talents. So make the most of that. Tackle that challenge head on if you aren't already. And if you are, again, comment below. Let me know what kind of creative field you're in, creative work you're doing, and why you're passionate about doing that. Why you get satisfaction from being a Christian creative. Last thought here, I just wanted to raise up. This could be a whole nother episode of podcast or Afterthoughts too, but I recently had a client contact me asking about doing a video project, and they had a sample of a video that they showed me. And as it turned out, it was a video that was AI generated. Very interesting. Looked pretty slick. I don't know enough about it yet. I'm kind of learning about all that, but how AI now is generating videos and art and creating people that look just like whoever you want them to look like, that can talk and emote on screen. I mean, it's just pretty amazing what AI can do. It's also a little scary. Are any of you using AI tools in your creative work? And if so, what kind of influence is that having on your work? What kind of struggles maybe are you having in worrying about, is that going to replace your work? Is that going to be a tool you can use? Or is it something you think will just be a fad that will quickly fade and people will continue to generate the work? I'm just curious about that. It's something I've just barely begun to think about. But AI, of course, has been a big issue lately. How does it affect us as creative Christians in the work that we're doing? And how do we reconcile it with our faith as well, too? So be curious to hear your thoughts. I know I've raised a lot of questions here in this episode of Afterthoughts. Feel free to pick and choose which ones you'd be interested in answering. Thanks so much for joining me again today. That's all I've got. Just some thoughts, as always, some afterthoughts after putting this latest podcast episode together. I'll be back again next week with another episode. And if you haven't listened to it yet, go check out Creative Christians, the inspiration episode, and let me know what you think. That's all I got today. God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.